We ready? Well, you don't have to catch everything I say on the video anyway. Alright, okay, good morning everyone. Sorry that I don't know if you did or didn't know that Rabbi Garari's away, but I'm filling in this morning. And the she was on the Parsha, right? Usually?
Yes.
Okay. Alright, so what we're going to do is have a look at the mitzvah at the beginning of the Parsha, which is probably one of the most well-known mitzvot in the Torah, mainly because it's mentioned in other contexts, not necessarily because everyone knows what the mitzvah is at the beginning of Parshas Ki Savo, but more because of the way it's mentioned in other contexts, the main one being the Pesach Haggadah. And that is the mitzvah of the Bikurim. You're welcome to take a chumash as well, but all the psukim you need are on the source sheet. Anyway, the mitzvah of Bikurim. Who can tell me a little bit about the mitzvah of Bikurim? Right, you bring the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, exactly. Today, when do we sort of not perform the mitzvah, but when do we remember the mitzvah? On which Chag? Shavuot, exactly. And what was the concept behind the mitzvah? Bringing the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, all of that's correct. But within that, and as you'll see at the beginning of this week's Parsha, within that it wasn't just the concept of bringing the first fruits or bringing it to the Kohen, and the beginning of this week's Parsha details exactly how that was done, but also, and this is what I want to have a look at today, not the practical element of the mitzvah in terms of what you give, what you bring, who you give it to, etc., but the verses and the sort of speech that the farmer that would come to the Beit HaMikdash would have to say when giving those Bikurim in the Beit HaMikdash. And if you have a look at the first source, there is how many psukim we've got? About 3, but there are a few more. Basically what it does is give a brief history of the Jewish people. Up until now, we'll have a look. Now I'll read it in English, but people are welcome to follow along in whatever language they like. And the Torah tells us, right, when you bring the Bikurim, the Torah says, you shall then recite as follows: before the Lord your God. This is what you have to say. My father was a fugitive Aramean. Who is that, the fugitive Aramean? Lavan. Okay, and how do we know it's Lavan? From the Haggadah. Excellent answer, from the Haggadah. But interestingly, we'll see that it's not so clear. There are different opinions on who it is. One opinion is definitely that it was Lavan. But some of the commentators point out that it's, when you think about it, logically, it doesn't really make sense that it was Lavan. But nevertheless, you're correct. The Haggadah definitely tells us that the fugitive Aramean that we're talking about was Lavan. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. So which part of Jewish history are we talking about? In Egypt, exactly, right? My father was the fugitive Aramean, whether that was Lavan, someone else, but anyway, after that, I go down to Egypt, and the people go down to Egypt, and they become a great and populous nation. Sentence number 6, the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. Does anyone know what portents are? No, neither do I, but basically what it's saying is miracles, right? So far we have what part of Jewish history is the farmer who's coming to the Beit HaMikdash, bringing the first fruits? What's he telling us about? Well, what does he have to say? My father was a fugitive Aramean. That's not his literal father, but the father of one of our ancestors was an Aramean. That we went down to Egypt, we became a populous nation, the Egyptians oppressed us, and God took us out of Egypt. That's probably the quickest way to sum up probably a few hundred years that you could ever have, and not just sum up a few, but think about all the things that make up the first half of Sefer Shemot, right? The oppression of the Jewish people after the death of Yosef, and then Moshe taking them out, and the plagues, and the sort of dialogue between him and Paro, and how Hashem takes the people out of Egypt, all of that is summed up now in 5 or 6 sentences by the farmer who comes to the Beit HaMikdash. And if you turn over the page, it continues. After saying, or after summarizing in a very short way how we went out from Egypt, he then continues, the farmer, sentence number 9, he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. You shall leave it before before the Lord your God, and bow low before the Lord your God. And you shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. So what we have here is the mitzvah of Bikurim. What are some of the other practices that we have in the Beit HaMikdash? Korbanot. So we have sacrifices. What else is part of the Beit HaMikdash?
Maybe pouring of water.
The Nisuch HaMayim. Exactly, the pouring of the water, or the water libation which took place on Sukkot. And actually the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, the Talmud tractate Sukkah, which talks all about and gives a very detailed description of how that would work, and the libation of the water and the different parties they would have on Sukkot. But as far as I know, in terms of not just a few words, but actual paragraphs that you're saying, the mitzvah of Bikurim is unique. We never have really any other case where, not talking about the Kohanim, but the average person would come to the Beit HaMikdash and not offer up a voluntary tefillah, a voluntary prayer, but would actually be mandated to say something. So it's not just the technical idea of giving of the first fruits to the Kohanim and to the Beit HaMikdash, but says the Torah, along with that, you have to talk about your history, right? Where it all started, the fugitive Aramean, the descent to Egypt, the fact that the Egyptians oppressed us, and then then he brought us to this land, the land flowing with milk and honey. Somebody wrote to me recently who was just in Israel, and I sent him a message while I was in Israel, how he hadn't been to Israel for a number of years, and he'd actually gone first. His parents were Holocaust survivors, and he'd gone to Poland as well to sort of do a roots trip as well, and then go to Israel. And I asked him how Israel was, and he said, look, it's definitely a land flowing with milk and honey. And he said, obviously Moshe was right, it just took us a few thousand years to get there. It's a shame he didn't warn us how long it was going to take. But definitely the farmer coming not just to the land of Israel, he's already living in the land of Israel. He comes to the Beit HaMikdash, he brings the Bikurim, he's mandated by the Torah to say, this is where I came from, and this is where I am now. Sorry, I'm just talking about the farmer because that sort of makes the most sense. If it's the idea of your first fruits, right? It's not necessarily just the farmer. I'm just using the farmer as an example. You had to have the fruits, right? So it depends what you were doing, I guess, is the answer. How the Bikurim would work in the year 2019, where most of us are no longer agriculturalists. That's an excellent question. But we have that question. Remember that the Torah, many of the psukim are based on the fact that many people were working in agriculture and farming then, etc. Right? Many of the mitzvot. How that would work in the how that's going to work in the third Beit HaMikdash, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure any of us are 100% sure how the mitzvah of Bikurim is. But the idea is, I was just using the farmer as an example. The idea is that somebody who's worked hard, who's produced fruit from their labor, then comes, takes the fruit to the Beit HaMikdash, and along with that fruit says to the Kohen, Arami Aved Avi, my father was a fugitive Aramean. And I think I want to talk about Pesach as well, even though obviously we're far away from Pesach, right? We're now almost at Rosh Hashanah. I think there's an interesting message here also for Rosh Hashanah. But these verses actually come up in our Pesach Haggadah, as you said at the beginning. These verses come up in our Pesach Haggadah. Why do they come up in our Pesach Haggadah? Well, more than to remind us, what's the most logical answer of why they come up in the Pesach Amidah? So Amidah, Pesach Haggadah, it's because they talk about Egypt. Right? We went down to Egypt, we were oppressed there, we became a populous nation, the Egyptians oppressed us, and God took us out with many miracles, B'yad Chazakah V'Zorah Netuyah. So it makes sense that it would be in our Pesach Haggadah. The Pesach Haggadah actually doesn't just use the words; it takes every few words and then sort of gives different explanations. It goes deeper into every few words. There's a few words and then a whole explanation. But what I want to understand, and what we're trying to understand in this particular shiur, is what was the point of this whole thing? Why is it that people come to the Beit HaMikdash, they bring the Bikurim? Why is it that the Torah mandates them to actually say something? And not just to say something which seems to have absolutely no connection to what's happening now. We understood the last bit. The idea that you brought us into this land. And you gave us this place, you brought us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey. All of that sort of makes sense because it's a recognition of what's going on at the moment. But why specifically when you bring the Bikurim does the Torah tell us or mandate us? It's not optional. It's obligatory. You come to the Beit HaMikdash, you have to say, Arami Oved Avi. My father was a wandering Aramean. What? What's that got to do with the first fruits? What's that got to do with the Beit HaMikdash? What's that got to do with anything? Anyone want to give any suggestion? I feel like there's not enough sort of talking in this shiur. It's just me talking and it's a bit boring, isn't it? So does anyone want to give any suggestions? We're not used to it. Oh, okay, got you.
That's why you have
All right.
interactive shiur.
Ah, okay. So well, that's only just to say, saves me talking too much, less effort from me. But yes.
I don't know. It's. We should remember where we came from. We should remember our roots and how we got through.
Yes.
From our forefathers, how we came down to Egypt, and we should thank God that we were here. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened.
Right. We should remember our roots. Okay. So I totally agree with that.
And reinforcing the hand of God. We're here thanks to God.
We're here thanks to God. So yeah, so a couple of comments. One is I definitely agree that it's important to remember your past in order to be able to have a future. Right? Often you hear those different words, and I think they're very true. Right? In one form or another, we say you always have to remember your past if you want to have a future. So that's very true, and that is definitely what's going on here. The question is, what is the connection between that and the mitzvah of Bikurim? Like I said, there was no obligation to say that with any of the korbanot, any of the sacrifices that were brought. Why all of a sudden the Bikurim are we instructed to talk about our history? And sorry, your comment about forcing the hand of God is also very true, right? But it's important to thank God, but why do we thank God specifically in this way? It would have been enough just to say, thank you for bringing us to this place, thank you for getting us to the Beit HaMikdash, even thank you for the fact that we have a Beit HaMikdash. Why is it that we have to go back a few thousand years and say, Arami Oved Avi? What's this Arami Oved Avi? So first of all, I want to have a look at who was this wandering Aramean? So far we've said that who was the wandering Aramean? Lavan. The Haggadah tells us, Bikesh Lavan la'akor et hakol, that Lavan wanted to destroy everything, right? Paro gazar rak al hascharim. Paro only wanted to kill the males, right? To throw the male babies in the river, but Lavan, he was worse. He wanted to get rid of everyone. Is that true, by the way? When does Lavan want to get rid of everyone? When do we know a story of Lavan wanting to actually physically annihilate the Jewish people?
Was that something with the idols?
Yeah. So there is this thing that he chased out. He was an idol worshipper, and Rachel had tried to sort of take his idols away. All of that's correct, but there's never any kind of physical annihilation, as far as we know, planned by Lavan.
He cheated Jacob.
No one's saying that he was a good guy, right? But where do we get this concept that the rabbis talk about in the Haggadah when they quote this pasuk of Arami Oved Avi, our father was a wandering Aramean, and they say on it, Bikesh Lavan la'akor et hakol, that Lavan wanted to get rid of everything, yet Paro gazar rak al hascharim, Paro wanted to only kill off the baby males, so Lavan is worse. Where does Lavan want to try it physically? Has anyone ever sat? I know it's not Pesach now, but since we're talking about something which I think has a connection both to Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, has anyone ever sat at their tables during the Haggadah and thought, what do you mean Bikesh Lavan Lakroin HaKol? The reason why we haven't done it is because actually it comes at the most boring part of the Haggadah. Right? We all get excited about Manishtara, Avadim Hayinu, then at the end Dayenu, but in the middle there's like a whole chunk of things which is actually, if you think about it, the most important part, because that actually tells the story of the Exodus from Egypt. But there's limited time, there's kids at the table, we're all hungry, kids are getting restless, we've got to go quickly through it. Has anyone ever thought, what does it mean Bikesh Lavan Lakroin HaKol? What does it mean that Lavan wanted to physically annihilate the people? So I think what it means is that Lavan, as we've seen throughout our history, sometimes the threat of assimilation is even greater than the threat of physical annihilation, and Lavan very much wanted to assimilate the Jewish people. Right? He tells Lavan tells Yaakov, his son-in-law, and his daughters, when they would like to leave and go back to Israel, why don't you stay here? Our daughters, we'll all marry into each other. That there's going to be sort of everyone will be friends. Everybody will get on. Everybody will marry to each other's families. And Yaakov tells him, no, that's not what's happening. Right, I have a promise from my grandfather Avraham Avinu. We're going back to the land of Israel. We have a mission in the world, and that I think is the understanding behind Bikesh Lavan Lakroin HaKol. But let's have a look at who was this wandering Arameans. If you look at the Ibn Ezra was one of the well-known commentators, or is one of the well-known commentators on the Torah. Many of his commentaries deal with the pshat, the simple translation of a sentence, plus often very much the grammatical nuances of a pasuk. We're not going to look at that right now. What I would like to do though is go to the third line in the English, in the middle of the line, Ibn Ezra on Dvarim. Has everyone got it? Yes? Says the Ibn Ezra, Lavan tried to destroy my forefather, and he went down to Egypt. Lavan never considered going down to Egypt. The plausible interpretation is that the Aramean refers to Yaakov, as if Scripture had said, when my forefather was in Aramea, right, because that's where he goes to, when he runs away from Esav, and then he goes to meet his uncle Lavan, and he works for him and then ends up marrying his daughters. He was lost, meaning he was a pauper without property. So Ibn Ezra's understanding, unlike the Haggadah that we read, is that who was the Aramean of Enavi? Yaakov was the Aramean of Enavi. And that makes more sense when we talk about my forefather was a wandering Aramean, right? We don't necessarily consider Lavan one of our ancestors, although he was, right, because Lavan was the father of Leah and Rachel, so in some ways he is, but we don't really consider, definitely not in terms of our spiritual ancestors, Lavan to be part of the Jewish people. So what does it mean that my forefather was a wandering Aramean? Says the Ibn Ezra, also grammatically, he says it doesn't make sense that actually the Aramean of Enavi, the Aramean was Yaakov. Okay, and what does it mean that he was a wandering Aramean? He says he was lost, meaning he was a pauper without property, that when Yaakov runs away from Esav, he really has absolutely nothing besides the clothes on his back, and that's the way that the Jewish people, that's really where the story of the Jewish people start, because Yaakov then and his extended family go down to Egypt, and in Egypt we become really a nation, and then we go out, we receive the Torah, etc. So Arami Oved Avi, if you want to, there are different ways of understanding it. Like we said, the Haggadah seems to suggest that the wandering Aramean was Lavan. Whether it's Lavan or Yaakov, the idea is that what do we talk about right at the beginning? We talk about the sort of low point that we started at, right? Arami Oved Avi, it wasn't always so great for us. My ancestor was a wandering Aramean, whether that was Lavan, and we don't need to talk about the sort of bad things associated with Lavan, whether that was Yaakov, and we talk about the fact that Yaakov had absolutely nothing, running away from his brother, had no property, had nothing besides what was on his back. Like the Haggadah tells us, Matchil Bignut, we start with sort of the not so nice parts, the parts that describe how difficult it was for us. Messiah B'Shevach, we finish with the good things and the miracles that Hashem performed for us. So, whether that's the Arami of Enavi, whether that's Yaakov or Lavan, like I said, we start with that and we end when we bring the Bikurim with Vayaviyenu El Hamakom Hazeh, that Hashem brought us to this particular place, to the Beit HaMikdash. So now that we understand what exactly that means, the Arami of Enavi, where we were, where we're coming from, what is, and in order to understand the answer to this question, I think we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the farmer in the times of the Beit HaMikdash who's coming to bring the Bikurim. What is the point? Why is it specifically here that we're told, bring the Bikurim, say this thing, talk about the low point in the lives of the Jewish people collectively, talk about the high point, the fact that you're here in the Beit HaMikdash, in the sovereign land of Israel, under Jewish control, with the Beit HaMikdash, with the temple. Why is it specifically when you bring the Bikurim? What's unique about the Bikurim? What was the point behind the Bikurim? Why did we bring Bikurim at all? And this, by the way, I think goes also towards the central theme of Sefer Dvarim, of the book that we're reading right now. Why was there a need to bring Bikurim at all? I'll open it up for audience participation. Also gives me an opportunity to drink my coffee.
To give back.
To give back, excellent answer. What do you mean by to give back?
Hashem did so much for you, so from your produce, because Yaakov was a pauper, had nothing.
Exactly. Okay, I think that's a fantastic answer, and I think that's exactly what the Torah is trying to tell us, and that's exactly what Moshe is trying to warn the Jewish people about, not just through the mitzvah of Bikurim, but often throughout the book of Dvarim. What's Moshe's concern for the Jewish people? It's the last month of his life. He's going over and over. I mean, there are certain new things which he's talking to them about that we haven't seen already in the Torah, but in one form or another, many of the mitzvot that he teaches the people, many of the commandments he gives the people in the book of Dvarim have already been taught in the previous 3 books. So Moshe is reminding them of their responsibilities, but often he'll also tell them, don't think that you're so great, don't think that it's all because of you that you're about to inherit and conquer the land of Israel. Don't say kochi ve'etzem yadi, that it was all about me, right? That it was all because of my strength and my hand that I was able to do what and accomplish and achieve what has happened to the Jewish people. Always remember where it comes from. It's not that a person shouldn't be proud of their accomplishments. It's not that a person shouldn't have self-esteem and be proud of what they've achieved. But says Moshe, don't get to the point where you're so proud of what you've achieved and you're so boastful about it that you say, you know what, it's all up to me. It was all because of me. I achieved it all by myself. Remember what happened. Remember what Hashem did for you when He took you out of Egypt. Remember that when you go into the land of Israel and you conquer and inherit the land of Israel, that also will be with Hashem's help. And Hashem will also perform miracles for the Jewish people in the land of Israel, maybe to a lesser extent, but still there are miracles. We know that there are miracles that happen as they enter and when they continue to conquer the land of Israel under the leadership of Joshua, the leadership of Joshua. Never get to the point, says Moshe, where you think it's all about you. And that is also the idea behind the mitzvah of Bikurim. Because, and I think not only that's the idea, but it's even more important when we actually come to the Beit HaMikdash. Think of a farmer in the first Beit HaMikdash. Right? We know that when we conquer the land of Israel, or we enter the land of Israel, there's a while before we get to the actual Beit HaMikdash. Right? First we have the Mishkan. Where's the Mishkan, by the way? Where's the tabernacle? In Shiloh. Anyone here been to visit it? There we go, the historical site in Shiloh today. We are lucky to live in a generation where the Jewish people have returned to the land of Israel, and actually many of those things we can now actually visit as sovereign people in our own land. But a farmer in the first Beit HaMikdash is a few hundred years, at least, from the desert, from the exodus from Egypt, from their entry into the land of Israel and sort of the challenges that they faced in conquering and inheriting the land. And often when we get to sort of a few hundred years later, we forget. We forget about what happened. Sometimes that can be a positive thing. And often it can be a very negative thing. Right? Talk about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. God has in some ways given us the gift of time, that even when people were very hurt by people, sometimes, not always, but sometimes over time, we can sort of get over it. We can ask for forgiveness, other people can ask us for forgiveness, and we can sort of restore friendships. So forgetting is not always a bad thing, but on a national level it almost always is a bad thing. The idea that the people could have forgotten where they came from and start to believe and think, we have a Beit HaMikdash now, we have a temple, it's all about me, it's all about us, it's got nothing to do with Hashem. I can't even remember who this Yaakov guy was, who this Lavan guy was, right? The Exodus from Egypt might be part of our national and collective history, but it means absolutely nothing to me. I wasn't there, my parents weren't there, my grandparents weren't there, never really understood the story. And so exactly when we think, or we could think, when we're bringing our own fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, and it's all about us, and we know nothing and can't remember anything about the Yetziat Mitzrayim, about the Exodus from Egypt, it's exactly then that Torah mandates, when you bring the Bikurim, pause, take a moment, reflect, but don't just reflect, you actually have to say something. Arami Oved Avi, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean, Vayered Mitzrayim, went down to Egypt. My ancestor started with nothing. They had absolutely nothing. They went down to Egypt, they were oppressed. And it's only because of the Ototo and the Muftim, the miracles that God performed for us that took us out of the land of Egypt. And then Vayivienu el Makom Hazeh, and then He brought us to this particular time, at this particular place. It's only because of that that I am able to be here today to bring those Bikurim. So on the one hand, it's a reminder to all of us where we came from, that it all belongs to Hashem at the end of the day, that we couldn't have done it without Hashem's help. But like I said, not that a person should be proud of their own accomplishments, but that has to come together with the recognition of the blessings from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's number one. But the second thing is, and here I also want to connect it to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, often in our own lives, it's very difficult for us to see things in perspective, because we're living it day to day. So when we're having a bad day, it's very difficult for us to think back and go, I've got challenges today and I might have challenges tomorrow, but when I think back, actually I have a lot to be thankful for. And because we live sort of in a day to day and we're busy and we don't have time necessarily to sit and reflect and be grateful every day, it's hard for us to do that. We always just sort of see ourselves in the moment. We don't often think about how much there is to be grateful for and how much we might have achieved. And sometimes, and that's why, we have Rosh Hashanah. One of the reasons I think we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the opportunity to reflect on the year that was, and maybe the year that will be ahead as well. And part of that, as well as thinking about where we can improve, obviously we know that's a big part of the concept of tshuva, of repentance, and Rosh Hashanah, but I also think part of it is to look back and be obviously with the first message, message of recognizing that things come from Hashem, but also to be proud of our own accomplishments. And often it's easier for us to do that when we take a step back, when we look back at the past, when we can see what we've accomplished, rather than living in the day-to-day, minute-by-minute moments that many of us live in our daily lives, without having that opportunity because we're so busy. And so when we bring the Bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash, we bring those first fruits, and we are about to give it to the Kohen, the Torah tells us, just stop a minute. Just remember, just reflect. First of all, that you're part of something which is greater than you as an individual or you as a family. You're part of the collective memory and history of the Jewish people. But that, on the one hand, means that we have to be thankful and recognize that it all comes from Hashem. And on the other hand, realize how proud we are and can be of where we came from and where we are now. And what we have been able to achieve as part of the Jewish people. And if you look, thank God we live in a generation that probably since the time of David and Shlomo HaMelech is the best time to be a Jewish person in history. If you think about the state, what we have now in the state of Israel, it's sort of, you look back at the horrors and oppression that the Jewish people had to go through. it's really, we don't, because we sort of like on a national level as well, not just talking about an individual level, we don't appreciate it enough sometimes because we live in the day-to-day, minute by minute sort of worries and stresses of our lives. But even on a collective national level, there's a lot we have to be thankful for every year, but especially when it comes to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of what Hashem has given us. And I think that's also part of the mitzvah of Bikurim, both on a personal and family level, but also on a national level as well. Any questions?
No, but as you said, we had this Irish Inquisition, the Holocaust, the whole thing.
And many
And it's
different things in between as well. And so we're very lucky and fortunate to be in the position we are today, both I think on a personal level but also on a national one as well. And that I think is the mitzvah of Bikurim. That's why we have it, that's why it's where it is. And those are the lessons that we can take from it. And with that, we will finish, I think, today's shiur, unless there are any other questions. No worries. Should I get Yaakov to turn off the video?